Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to C.S. Lewis, Grief Observed, Part 4. Book 1 was The Locked Door in the Empty House. Book 2, Memories Betrayed, A Cosmic Sadist. Book 3, A Door No Longer Shut and Bolted. Now we're moving to Book 4, From Locked Door to Mystery. A sword in God's hand. She is in God's hand. That gains a new energy when I think of her as a sword. Perhaps the earthly life I shared with her was only part of the tempering. Now perhaps he grasps the hilt, weighs the new weapon, makes lightnings with it in the air, a right Jerusalem blade. Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan, meaning God's word, Book of Revelation, double-edged sword. One of the challenges is for those of us who are not greatly literate when it comes to all of the different words used by the great English, by that I mean British preachers and churchmen. There are certain things that get used that C.S. Lewis used very clearly that get lost in our American English translation. And so when he talks about this as a sword, and then he goes, a right Jerusalem blade. So when we start talking about these things, we're like, well, why would his wife be a right Jerusalem blade? So the first thing, though, I want to start with is, why do we connect a tragedy or pain or loss with ourselves? Is everything really about us? Because he said, now that I'm beginning to see this, I now see how God was using this to shape me. While C.S. Lewis does not downplay H's suffering, this book is not as much about her as it is about him. It is his grief observed. Notice he has not spent a lot of time talking about H's grief, her mourning, her questions. This is about his grief, his questions. And when we ask, why is that? Well, it's pretty simple. I'm the one that got left behind. I'm the one who lost. Because if it was simply H, the moment she stepped into God's hands, as our Bible verse said today from Revelation 21, there is no more tears, no more crying, no more loss, no more death, no more disease. And so the moment that she stepped into God's hands, all of the things that she struggled and suffered over were instantly forgotten. As Jesus said, a woman who is pregnant goes through all of the changes of her body, all of these, and then in those last minutes, there is all this pain. But then Jesus says, the moment the baby is born, she forgets the pain because she's holding the child in her hands. And so this is what we're seeing. And so C.S. Lewis, for all of his philosophical genius, is struggling because this loss right now is personal. It's about him, not about H. Now, one moment last night can be described in similes. Otherwise, it won't go into language at all. Imagine a man in total darkness. He thinks he is in a cellar or dungeon. Then there comes a sound from far off, waves or wind-blown trees or cattle half a mile away. And if so, it proves he's not in a cellar, but free in the open air. Or it may be a much smaller sound close at hand, a chuckle of laughter. And if so, there is a friend just beside him in the dark. Either way, a good sound. So up until now, C.S. Lewis was talking about, I'm standing at the door to heaven, and I'm pounding on it with all that I can. And all I hear is the door being locked and double bolted inside. Every time I showed up and wanted to celebrate with God, he opened it up and we celebrated. But now here I am in my grief and my mourning, and he locks the door on me. And C.S. Lewis describes this. And I want you to note, it is so dark that he cannot tell where he's at. If you remember ever going into a room that has no windows and maybe only one door, and that door leads to a dark hallway, and you turn off the lights, and suddenly you literally cannot see the hand in front of you. So Zion Fairbanks, where we used to base out of to do our vacation Bible school ministry, they had a basement that had no windows, and it had a hallway that was at night dark. And so we would fly in, And the first thing we would do is we would have dinner with Pastor Keenert and his church team, and we would then head down, and we'd have the boys in one room and the girls in another. We'd spread out our sleeping bags, and we would turn off the light, and it immediately became so dark you could not see. Now remember, outside, the reason this is this way is because outside the sun was up 24 hours a day. So they put us down in the basement. The problem is when you awake, and granted, it's only a couple hour time difference, but when you awake, you have no idea whether it is 9 a.m., noon, 3 p.m., 6 p.m., 9 p.m., midnight. You have no idea. And we didn't have cell phones back then, so we couldn't just go tap, oh, it's. And so we would set a little alarm clock, you know, those little travel alarms, and we couldn't see them, but we would very quietly go out into the hallway, go down to the end where just a tiny bit of light was coming through, and look at our watch or look at the alarm clock and say, oh, it's 3 a.m. or it's 5 a.m. And we could tell by how much sun was shining through. So C.S. Lewis says right now he feels like it is so dark, he has no idea. He thinks he's maybe locked in a dungeon because that's what it feels like. And it has nothing to do with the place he's in. It's the feelings inside of him. And then all of a sudden, I hear a sound far off, cattle, an ocean. Or maybe I hear the sound of someone near me, the chuckle of laughter, and I recognize the laughter as a friend's. And suddenly I realize I'm not alone. And this changes the entire perception. I am free. I have not been bound. Now, I have to figure out what to do with the darkness, how to make my way to some place where I can see at least enough to, in some form or fashion, make sense of it. So why would it be better to be out in the open and free, even though you cannot see or touch anything, than it would be in a dungeon? What is this simile about it, and how does it change the way he sees or will see things? If we're locked in a dungeon, we're lost. And remember what Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, the only way to get out of the dungeon is for somebody to let us out. The lock is on the outside. Several times when I have been called upon to help, we did some involuntary admits at the psychiatric ward at various hospitals. And if you've never done that, and I pray that you never have to, one of the first things that you have to put into your brain is the moment that you go into the room with this individual and the door closes, there is no doorknob on the inside. No lock, no way out. The only way out is for someone to open the door. And of course, it's designed that way very intentionally. And so when C.S. Lewis said, if I'm in this place and the only way out is for someone to let me out, and I've been screaming and I've been pounding and I've been asking and all of this, and it has not happened. But all of a sudden, now, wait a minute, I'm outside. Or I'm in a place where I'm not alone. Now, all of a sudden, it means that there's hope. That I'm no longer locked in such a way that I'm confined. Now, it's about me discovering the freedom that is already mine. I just didn't know it. And this is what I love about C.S. Lewis. Because when we discover that we have always had a certain freedom, we just didn't know we had it, suddenly now it's about how we're going to apply that, how we're going to embrace it, how we're going to use this freedom. And by the way, we can choose not to. We can choose to stay in the darkness and remain there, or we can begin to explore. And even in the darkness, as we wander, we may bump into a wall, okay? We now know that this direction, whatever direction this is not where we need to go. So we turn. We can measure 1, 2, 3. We may run into another wall, or trees, or find that ocean or water. We turn around, we walk the other way. Eventually, we will find a place that allows us to get out. And we find our way into the sunlight, back into the daytime again. And all of this is a metaphor, darkness being loss, grief, and death, light being that which belongs to God. This is why Jesus said, as long as it's light, you get the work done. I'm not mad enough to take such an experience as evidence for anything. It is simply the leaping into imaginative activity of an idea which I would always have theoretically admitted. The idea that I, or any mortal at any time, may be utterly mistaken as to the situation he is really in. Now all of a sudden, C.S. Lewis has come, and I really consider that section of the book is the turning point. See, I always knew that there were possibilities. However, I thought that this, for whatever reason, I chose this as the only possibility. But now that other possibilities arise, now I know that I'm free, or at least have the potential for freedom. The word potential, of course, is very loaded, but his point is, I now know that there's the possibility that I can discover what I have been crying, pounding on the door, and screaming about this whole time. And then we ask the question, how do we know whether we're dreaming or living? I have friends whose dreams are so real that they wake up and it literally, even during the entire day, they struggle because that dream was so real that they actually believed that they were going through whatever they were going through. And even though in the back of their minds, they understand it was a dream because they woke up sometimes soaked with sweat in their bedroom. Nevertheless, it was so real, it was as though they were transported to wherever that dream took place and then brought back. And of course, St. John says, I was taken up into heaven. How I got there, I don't know. But then I was brought back. And because time, past, present, future, all happening at the same time, C.S. Lewis and others have presupposed that it is possible that when we have these semblances of deja vu, that they really are things that we have experienced or are experiencing. And it's almost like for just a second, God allows the door to go, so that we can see through just for a quarter of a second and we're back wherever we were. And there's no way of knowing this till we get to heaven. But this is what I love about C.S. Lewis. He says, okay, now I understand. It's always been there. I just couldn't or wouldn't see it. 5 senses: an incurably abstract intellect, a haphazardly selective memory, a set of preconceptions and assumptions so numerous that I can never examine more than a minority of them, never become even conscious of them all. How much of total reality can such an apparatus let through? Grief narrows our bandwidth. If we want to go back in pre-computer days and internet days, it's one of those things that if you remember taking a hose or a straw and realizing that even under the maximum amount of pressure, this is the most that you can get liquid through a certain opening. Doesn't matter what the opening is. And he says, my ability, my bandwidth is not great enough for me to process everything that all of my senses are sensing. We feel, but it's raw emotions. Our knowing and thinking is clouded. Fear, anxiety, tiredness, pain. This is why when you get to Elijah's got this moment. He says, look, God, it's over. It's done with. I am the last one that loves you. There is nobody else on the whole earth that even knows you exist. So just let me die, take me to heaven, and wipe out the earth. And it's funny because this is one of those things that I love this because when you read this, and if you've ever had one of those days when you were just done with everything, God does not say, you need to pray more. You need to go to church more. You need to give a bigger offering. God says, you need to go get some sleep, and I'll send some birds with some food, and I'm going to make sure that there's this little river that's flowing outside of your cave. So go find the cave where it's quiet and dark and cool, and I'll have the birds bring you some food, and I'm going to have you, have water right outside. So you go get some sleep, then eat and drink, and then go back and sleep some more, and then eat and drink. And then, then the day comes when Elijah goes, God, this is great. I love living in the cave. The birds are great. They bring some food. It's not what I would choose, but it's good. The water is sweet and crystal pure. So God, this is great. I'm just going to hunker in here and I'm just going to stay here forever and ever. And God allows the river to dry up. The birds stop coming to bring food. And Elijah's going, God, don't you love me? And God says, you have work to do. You needed to be refreshed. You've been refreshed. Now get back out to work. And this is where, when we get to grief, we scream, we yell, we doubt, we question, we walk away. And it's only when we get to a point where in our screaming and our doubting and in our walking away and all those other things, and one day all of a sudden we can actually hear ourselves think, just for a moment. And we hear ourselves think and we think, where did that thought come from? And then another thought, and another thought. Because what's happening is we have literally released all of our emotions, our pain. We kept screaming until we got to the point where we realized that there was nothing more to scream about. We'd said everything. And then we began to hear ourselves. We began to hear God. And it comes and goes. Then comes the worst day. The day comes when not only aren't we screaming and yelling and doubting and questioning, but the day comes where for just 30 seconds, we do not think of the one who we have been mourning, the one we've been grieving. Now we feel guilty. What kind of person am I that for those 30 seconds, I forgot the one that I said I loved, that I would never forget? And it's not that you forgot them, but you realized that just as when they were still alive and you used to go to work or you had to go someplace and do something, and all of this, it's not that you were consciously remembering them every second. They were always in the back of your mind. But now all of a sudden, you had to concentrate 100% on something. And so you simply said, I know they're with me. They're back here. But now I'm going to take care of this. And that day comes when that happens to you. And in the mourning and in the grieving, 30 seconds. Then the next time it might be a minute long. Next time it might be 2 minutes long. This is not you forgetting them. This is not you no longer mourning or grieving. This is about you being able to get back to life. When somebody goes through a trauma, we give them 6 months. We say in 6 months, they need to grieve, they need to mourn. Some do it quicker, and some need just a little bit more. But at 6 months is usually where we begin to diagnose somebody with either PTSS or PTSD. When after 6 months, they have not been able to get back into their life. Not fully, they're not totally back. They're not 100%, but they're enough back that they're able to function. And if it hasn't happened in 6 months now, we've got, and this is where they have to take and move up a couple of steps in treatment because it's no longer there. And so what C.S. Lewis is saying is all of this, my emotions, God gave me all these emotions. They're not evil. They're not sinful. These are the things I'm feeling. These are the things I'm experiencing. And I don't have the bandwidth to fully process them. The book of Lamentations was written by Jeremiah after the fall of Jerusalem, 586 BC. It's a funeral dirge for a city. And by the way, when we say a city, we do not mean the city. We actually mean the church, the people, the community. See, too often, like when Lahaina gets destroyed by wildfire, to be honest, with the exception of the Historical Society, few people cared about the actual buildings. They cared about the buildings because they were their homes. They were their businesses. They were the places that they had fun, where they went to Kimos to have hula pie, or Cheeseburger in Paradise, or the art galleries where they were inspired. It's not the building that they're mourning. The loss of the building simply represents something far bigger in their life. And so when Jeremiah is lamenting what happened to Jerusalem, and he'll even say the temple is gone and all of these wonderful places are gone. That's not what's important. What's important is what those things represented. With the temple gone, it means God is no longer present with us. With the government buildings destroyed, it means we no longer have someone to guide us and direct us. With the police and the fire gone, it means we no longer have somebody to protect us. Jeremiah was called the weeping prophet and was told, you must go, and nobody's going to hear what you have to say, but you still have to go. And this is an amazing thought. I'm sorry, Jeremiah, but even before you were born, I chose you, equipped you. You are going to go and take an impossible message to an impossible people. And of course, when he says no one will listen, some did. But overall, no matter how much effort he put into it, unlike Jonah and Nineveh, the people are not going to listen. In fact, they're going to stone him. They're going to try to stone him to death. They're going to throw him in jail. The nation of Israel was totally overwhelmed and conquered, and yet they could not see what was happening around them. Even as Jeremiah preached the truth, they could not or would not accept it, and they set about silencing him, rather than saying, you know what, Jeremiah, you're right. We have sinned against God. We have sinned against one another. We need to confess our sins and be restored. Instead, they said, how dare you say those things? We are God's people. This is his holy city. And they began to put such a polish on it that obviously God is not God. Remember a few weeks ago when C.S. Lewis asked, is God really God? Is there a God? And if there is it possible that he's an evil God? Because what I'm going through and what I'm suffering through is not something that I can ascribe to a loving God. And so the people to Jeremiah said, look, we only got two choices. Either God is God, and he's incapable of taking care of us, or there is no God, and we were wrong all along. And when we ask, why is it so hard to accept or listen to those who are speaking the truth? The answer is because in here, we know how we want things. And this is why when somebody says, hey, have you thought about, we're like, yeah, I thought about it. The price is too high. Okay? I want you to listen to Jeremiah's words as he pours out his lament. He pierced my heart. God pierced my heart with arrows from his quiver. I became the laughingstock of all my people. They mocked me in song all day long. Can you imagine this? They actually wrote songs about Jeremiah and how terrible he was. He has filled me with bitter herbs, sated me with gall. That's really bad wine. He has broken my teeth with gravel. He has trampled me in the dust. I have been deprived of peace. I have forgotten what prosperity is. So I say, my splendor is gone, and all that I had hoped from the Lord. I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I will remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. This is just a tiny, tiny bit of what Jeremiah says in his book. Jeremiah was put into a no-win situation, one that set him up for failure. And yet God says it is a necessary failure and it is a necessary necessity. Now think of something in your own life that was a failure and yet necessary, either for yourself or for somebody else. Because again, every time we make everything about us, we forget that sometimes God uses us to teach a lesson to somebody else or to protect somebody else, even though we wind up, if you will, taking the arrows from the quiver. Would you rather be the example, the one God uses to make the point, even if it's painful? Or would you rather be the one who supposedly has the ability to learn the lesson? John 9:3-4. I love this. The disciples walk up, they look at this guy who's blind, and they said, so who sinned? Who were his parents that he was born that way? Listen to the judgment in that. And Jesus says, neither him nor his parents. This happens so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when nobody can work. Wow. Now, there's nothing wrong with the blind man's hearing. So he's listening to this when the disciples are going, so who sinned, him or his parents? Obviously, somebody really ticked off God. This is going back to the book of Job. Jesus says, nope. No, we're not saying this guy didn't sin. It's not that he was sinless. It's that what happened to him happened so that the glory of God could be revealed. And no, God did not simply randomly choose this guy and say, I'm going to afflict him. And that's just what God simply said, this individual was going to be born this way. My son's going to come along a little while later, because there were hundreds of these individuals and Jesus did not cure all of them. But Jesus is saying, we need to stop with the judgment and assume that every time somebody has something terrible. Our seminary, by the way, a bunch of trees, roofs, buildings were damaged. One of the big stained glass windows that were built by or created by someone very famous and very special was broken because a tree crashed through it. That is nothing compared with the death and the destruction in other places in St. Louis. And this is where we sometimes have to step back and we have to remember that our losses are nothing compared with others. Ours may have a higher dollar value, a higher sentimental value, but Kayla was telling me that the area that was hard hit is often the people that are living there, by the way, are people who don't have a lot. So the people who already didn't have a lot have now lost even more. And so this is where we have to step back and we have to begin to realize that as we go through our losses and our grieving, there might be somebody around us who lost more. Jeremiah continues, "Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassion never fails. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those who hope in him, whose hope is in him. To the one who seeks him, it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man to bear the yoke while he is young." So the first thing Jeremiah says is, everything is falling apart. My life is falling apart. Everybody goes around singing about how terrible I am and how, they should pity me. Everything that I had envisioned, everything my mom envisioned for me, none of it's going to come true. And then he says, but I have hope. And it is this hope in Jesus, the Messiah, that I am clinging to that makes the difference. Jeremiah has not given up and accepts his role in the divine plan of God. He's willing to be vocal and honest, but at the same time, hopes beyond hope that God is wrong and someone will listen. Now, that everything he did was not done in vain. And this is what I love about him. Jeremiah simply says, this is what I've been called to be and do. So I'm going to be it. I'm going to do it. And it's painful and it hurts. And I have no idea how all this is going to play out. The day is going to come when I know that God will redeem us. And that's what I cling to. C.S. Lewis continues, "I will not, if I can help it, shin up either the feathery or the prickly tree. Two widely different convictions press more and more on my mind. One is that the eternal vet is even more inexorable and the possible operations even more painful than our severest imaginings can forebode. But the other, that all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all the manner of things shall be well." Now, we know the truth lies in between, not at the ends. Lewis uses the term eternal vet as a metaphor for God. He's suggesting God's actions, while seemingly harsh or painful, are ultimately benevolent and aimed at the best outcome, even if Lewis doesn't fully understand that best outcome. The word inexorable means something that cannot be persuaded or changed. Lewis is highlighting the feeling of helplessness in the midst of his grief. You see, as long as we think we can change someone's mind, as long as we think that we can bribe somebody or threaten somebody, and we do not have to go through whatever it is that we think we're going to have to go through, we have hope. But the moment that C.S. Lewis realized that, number one, H is not going to get resurrected the next day, and that magically, 2 days after she died, he's not going to wake up and everything's going to be better, that he has to work through all this, all of a sudden now he has to say, okay. I was talking to a couple of my friends who run marathons. And obviously I'm not a marathon runner. And I just say, how do you handle, the last mile? And this is nothing new. They say this over and over again. The last mile is no different than the first mile. If you give in to the pain, you're never going to make it more than a mile. You have to understand that it's not even the finish line. It's you simply keep going until either you can't go anymore or you finish. And it was an interesting concept because oftentimes when we give up, it's not that we didn't have a little more energy. It's not that we didn't have a reserve. It's that for some reason we lost hope. So the very first time I did the Great Aloha Run, used to walk from Aloha Tower to Aloha Stadium, and we came over the rise, and there's the stadium, and I'm like going, yes, this is good. And then we get down to where they take the tickets when they used to get, for the swap meet. It's like, yes. And it's like, there's the stadium. And the guy goes, and you have to walk all the way around the stadium. And it's like, sir, it's nothing personal, but I may pick you up and throw you to the parking lot. And so, and then it's like, and then all of a sudden, you see everybody going through the little chute. And you're like, okay. And then you get in there, and then you see the finish line. And suddenly, instead of this, you're like, okay, I can do this. And you finish the rest of it. And I just realized, okay, that was only 8-point-something miles. I thought, okay, you simply triple that, and you keep the same mindset. And obviously train. And by the way, just so you know, I did a tremendous amount of training the day before the race. I walked 2 miles. I figured that was good enough. So when I did a total of 20 of them, I guess, and I got my time down well under 3 hours, and it was really good. But it took me, I had to figure out how to train, how to do it. And then all of a sudden, I was no longer given false hope. When I got to that rise, because by the way, when I started, we actually had a completely different route. And so when we switched over to the new route, same thing. But I knew not to give in and go, I'm almost there. Because the moment you're almost there, your whole body changes. And so you have to keep that up. No, I'm not almost there. And even afterwards, because they will not allow you to cross the finish line and lay down right there, because 10,000 people are just going to step on you. And so you have to keep going. And you go and you get the piece of King's Hawaiian bread and your banana and your Gatorade, and you get all the t-shirt and the other stuff they give you. And then you got to go all the way to your car. And then you have to drive home. And then you have to hope there is enough hot water to just soak in the tub. And then it's all forgotten the next day when you wake up. C.S. Lewis says, I was so caught up in the moment that I had forgotten the reality of that which was beyond the moment. He is struggling to reconcile his grief with his faith. He acknowledges the possibility that God's actions are even more difficult and painful than he can imagine, and he is grappling with the idea that even in the face of such pain, all shall be well. Once you accept that there may be good in pain and loss, the real struggle begins. It is a matter not of reconciliation, but of acceptance, which is a very different and harder thing. See, it's one thing for me to say, okay, God, I get it. All things work together for you, okay? But then it's like, wait a minute. Do I really have to go through all this? See, now I understand that what I'm going through is your plan, God. I get it. But do I have to go through it? And can I take a shortcut? And can't you carry me? Because, that whole thing of footprints in the sand. Can't you just carry me? Because even though I've accepted that this is part of life, I don't like it, and I'm not sure that I know how I'm going to be able to handle it. Pictures, images, and ideas of God. I need Christ, not something that resembles him. I want H, not something that is like her. A really good photograph might become, in the end, a snare, a whore, an obstacle. The argument over icons in the church. First commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Are they more than a representation? At what point does it become dangerous? An individual who we did the funeral for last year. So the spotlights that are up here never existed until 2000. We did a youth gathering on the Big Island. We had 700 kids come from all over the West Coast. We went over, and our DCE, Jake, at the time, he set this all up with his partner in crime, Joel, who was the DC at St. Mark, and it was fantastic. But one of the things we had to do was we had to buy some spotlights, so we did. The spotlights sat in a box in a closet for like a year or two. And all of a sudden, we stumbled across them. It's like, oh, yeah. And one of our church guys, who now lives in Alaska, said, Pastor, we can hook those up and actually bring more light to the altar area because it's always been dark. This sounds good. So we went and we got the lights. Okay. Now, quite by accident, and this is why I have to mention this, quite by accident, when we took the two lights and put it on the cross, if I were to raise the screen and bring all the lights up, we created a shadow on each side of the cross. Now that Sunday, everybody came into church, Pastor, there's the two thieves on either side of Jesus. And we're like, yeah, I guess that is what it is. Oh. And so from then on, and because we didn't have video screens back then, because our contemporary service was in the evening. So anyway, week after week, people come in and there's the two shadows, the two thieves on either side of Jesus. And okay. And then comes the day where we actually seriously talked about completely reimagining the sanctuary. We had a lot more people in church. We were going to create an area over here for worship, and everybody was going to be seated and facing this direction. And the organ was going to go up there, and that area back there was going to go away because it was going to be, and it was going to be all set up, and it was going to be, and we were going to put the video screens on the walls. We had all this stuff. And one of our members, longtime member, came and he said, Pastor, you cannot do that. And I'm like, why, Jim? He says, Pastor, those two crosses are an identity of our church. Now, he was here when we didn't have them, but they had become so in tune with his personal theology that he couldn't imagine walking into the sanctuary and not seeing them. And no matter how many times I said, I'm sure that we can get three crosses on that wall. No, it wouldn't be the same. And we stopped and we gave up on it. But this is where something becomes such a trap that we can no longer move past it. Now, this wasn't dangerous. It was just an obstacle. But what C.S. Lewis is saying is my imagination, my imagining of God and H and the church and everything else. Images, I suppose, have their way, have their use, or they would not have been so popular. It makes little difference whether they are pictures and statues outside the mind or imaginative constructions within it. What is the difference between an image that's outside the mind and one that's inside the mind? Because everybody here, by the way, just so you know, again, the candles on the wall, all different sizes and shapes. We used to actually have actual wax candles, and our altar guild had to spend literally hours every week carving the candles so that they could be the right size. And we had a family that was leaving, they were moving to the mainland, and they said, we would like to make a donation and get oil candles, because Letty was one of the individuals who over and over again had to do this. And so we said that would be great. So we had these oil candles made, and we put them up, and we made them just like the other ones. Okay. And I had this woman in the church that always explained to me, oh, no, Pastor, those candles represent the people of God, tall, fat, short, skinny. It's a representation. So I, of course, was telling the story because she was one of the founding members of the church. So I'm doing a funeral for the Burgess family up at Mililani Mortuary. And as I was leaving, there's always two parties at a funeral, the one that's inside and then the one on the tailgate in the parking lot. And as I was walking out, they said, why don't you pull up a chair or actually a tailgate and sit with us for a while? And I said, okay. And one of the guys introduced himself to me, and I said, hey, aren't you the guy that made the candelabras and the thing for the pulpit and all that and the altar? He goes, yeah, it was me. I said, I got to tell you, that is just amazing. And I said, such a beautiful symbolism of the candles all being different sizes representing the people of God. And he goes, oh, bro, I don't know what you're talking about. He says, Pastor Marty and I, we went over to the junkyard, and that's all the stuff we could find. We simply glued it together and welded it. And I go, so the next week, I come and I say, Pam, I just met with the Burgesses at the funeral. She goes, and I said, he says that she says, oh, but it's a much better story the other way. And I'm like, okay, so today we will tell you they represent all the different people of God. But the truth of the matter was, it was just a guy who went over to the junkyard, found a bunch of metal, and made it work. And this is where sometimes we can allow our presuppositions and put everything in a box that now we no longer can see the truth of God. To me, however, their danger is more obvious. Images of the holy easily become holy images, sacrosanct. My idea of God is not a divine idea. It has to be shattered time after time. He shatters it himself. He is the great iconoclast. Could we not almost say that this shattering is one of the marks of his presence? The incarnation is the supreme example. It leaves all previous ideas of the Messiah in ruins. And most are offended by the iconoclasm, and blessed are those who are not. But the same thing happens in our private prayers. So, icon, person or thing regarded as a representative symbol or as worthy of veneration. Sometimes, by the way, when somebody says, this represents me, and so if I hand it to you and you take that, you now have my authority, okay? Back in those days, the ring of the ruler, if I gave the ring to somebody, they had my power and my authority. They spoke for me. An iconoclast, a person who attacks cherished beliefs or institutions, a destroyer of images used in religious worship. In other words, we're going to tear these things down because that isn't Jesus. Iconoclasm, the action of attacking or assertively rejecting cherished beliefs and institutions or established values and practices. And the problem is we can attack those things which should not be attacked. But we can also venerate things to the extreme that now all of a sudden, that really is Jesus, not the real Jesus. That's why C.S. Lewis said when Jesus showed up and he said, I'm here, a lot of people said, sorry, you don't look like the Jesus that I was waiting for, so you can leave and I'm going to wait for my Jesus. I'm going to wait for the Jesus that looks, acts like I expect Jesus to look and act. And C.S. Lewis says the danger of that is that we then will miss God. So we were standing at the airport yesterday, and one of our folks who is from the Big Island, she kept looking at her phone. Sorry, we were at the hotel getting ready to go to the airport. She kept looking at her phone, and there was a picture on the phone. And I said, what are you doing? She says, I'm getting picked up by my dad's cousin. Well, that actually makes her my cousin. But I said, yeah, okay, I understand. She's your second cousin and removed or something. She goes, yeah. And she said, I haven't seen her in forever. So I've got a picture of her so that when somebody just pulls up, I can look at it and look at them and recognize them. I said, oh, is it a new picture? She said, no, I couldn't find a new picture. She said, that's why I'm really here and staring at it, because they may have changed. So I'm looking for identifying marks. It's like when you order a Lyft or an Uber, they send you a picture of the car and the license plate number. And yesterday, our Lyft driver that took us to the airport, the first thing he said, are you Daniel? Talking to Daniel. And he says, yes. He says, oh, because he says, I pulled up one time and these people got in my car and I took off. And then I got this phone call from the guy I was supposed to pick up. Yeah. If you've never met God, how would you describe him? If you were Moses, Elijah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. They stacked rocks, golden calves, snakes on a pole, fire, wind. At what point does such thing becomes dangerous? In 2 Kings 18:4, years and years after the Israelites have left the wilderness and are now the nation of Israel with their own land, it says one day the king came in and he took the pole that had the snake on it from the wanderings in the wilderness, and he destroyed it because the people had started to worship it instead of God. And this is where all of a sudden we began to ask the question, what does it mean to worship God? And C.S. Lewis says, if I can understand what worship of God means, it may mean that I get a better grasp on my grief, on my pain, and on the role that God is using all of that in order not only to heal H, but to heal me. And now all of a sudden it does become about him, because this is all about him being healed. All right, go in peace, serve the Lord in gladness. Have a great week. Enjoy the week before, and then hopefully next week all of you get an extra day off on Monday.